This episode is sponsored by Realtor.com, who wants you to take advantage of your free profile on Realtor.com. By claiming and completing your free profile, adding a photo, and all of the information that puts you head and shoulders above the competition, you're on your way to receiving free leads, helping search engines find you, and staying top of mind with past clients. To learn more about claiming your free profile, go to Realtor.com/profile. Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Real View podcast. I'm your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today, our special guest, Summer Goralik. She is a University of California graduate and California real estate broker. She is a former California Department of Real Estate investigator who has a deep and broad understanding of California real estate law. Her real estate experience and escrow background includes the private sector, regulatory, and law enforcement experience. Summer, welcome onto the show.
Thank you so much, Allison. I appreciate it.
Of course. And I think this is episode number 172. I just pulled it up a minute ago. We've never had a compliance expert on this show before, so I think it's awesome.
Oh boy, pressure's on now.
So I think it's awesome to be having you with us today, to be hearing a little bit more about your perspective on everything that's going on in our real estate world. It's really going on at all, right? But before we get started into this world of what's happening in our industry and addressing some of that, I want to hear a little bit more about you, Summer. I'd love to learn a little bit about your background, your career story, what got you interested in the world of real estate and compliance, and share with us a little bit of your background.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing. That's the classic answer, right? I graduated with a sociology degree. I was going to go on to law school, and I just didn't get there. I got sucked into the escrow industry, and I worked in that for 5 years. My mom has been a real estate agent for over 30 years, and my aunt was a real estate attorney. So there was definitely real estate around me. And escrow, as stressful as it was very interesting. And it really is a crash course in real estate, right? Depending on the transactions you're handling. And then from there, I took a very interesting turn that I think everyone was surprised in my family that I did, is started working for the California Department of Real Estate as an investigator. And so I worked there for 6 years, and I have to say, I really loved working for the DRE. Just a great organization. We had great leadership, and I had the opportunity and to work with the leaders. I had a great work relationship with Wayne Bell, who was the real estate commissioner at the time, and I was writing articles, and I was on special task forces, and the DRE is an exciting place. You wouldn't think it. But, we worked with the FBI, we worked with law enforcement agencies. I went on search warrants, and, we were raiding brokers' offices. And I don't think people think of state departments like that, but they're very connected in some ways to law enforcement. And then so from there, it was like a natural extension that I started working for the Orange County District Attorney's Office. I always like to tell people, we worked in the real estate fraud unit. I was the only one that didn't have a gun. So I was walking around, no gun, just an agency expert, but really exciting times. I went from the DRE, where you're handing out paper, right, desist and refrain orders and accusations, to basically, at the DA's office, putting people behind bars. So that was kind of wild. And then basically from the last 7 years, I've been a real estate compliance consultant. So I left the DA's office, the birth of my son, who's now 8. And I started at my own business. And so I have to say, I really love it. I work with real estate brokers and agents. I help them understand the real estate law, prepare for government audits, and, just proactively, get compliant. And there's so many different areas, from advertising compliance and transactions, and brokers working on broker supervision. So I really do love what I do. And, it's an opportunity to write articles and work with my old colleagues in some ways. So it's really fun.
No, that's awesome. And thank you so much for sharing. And we at Ohio Realtors just have the best relationship with our Ohio Division of Real Estate, and we're very super close partners with them. So we appreciate everything you guys do for our industry, for helping us stay compliant, for helping us, make sure we have all of our ducks in the row and that we're being the best professionals that we can be. Because I think that's really, what it comes down to at the end of the day. Were you close with the California Realtors when you were there? Did you guys work a lot with them?
Yeah, I definitely remember meetings. And, since being a consultant, I've spoke at many realtor association meetings. And, they are such, the local boards and the associations, they bring so much value. There's so much education to be had by those groups. And for me, I think that's like one of the most important aspects of their existence is to educate their members, keep it, it's kind of, it's above the standards, to learn and to understand how to do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Nice little plug for the
Yeah,
associations
no.
there. No, but we do. We love our superintendent and everyone over there at our Ohio division. You guys are awesome, and thank you for all the hard work that you do. Because I know it is very, it's a lot, and I know our superintendent works her butt off too. So we appreciate you guys and love our partnership together. Okay, so I think we should get started in today's topic. And as we were chatting before we started recording, a lot of people have feelings about this. A lot of people have opinions on it, but we're going to just dive into this topic and hear from your perspective, Summer, on all of the stuff that's going on in our world. I think maybe let's just start at the beginning about the lawsuits for anyone who's listening who has not heard anything about it or is unfamiliar with it. Talk briefly to us just about the case and what impact it might have on our industry.
Yeah, so there's been several commission lawsuits over the years, but I think the one that's most, present in everyone's minds is the Sitzer Burnett case that was originally filed. It's a federal case, originally filed in Missouri back in 2019. And the plaintiffs, which amount to about 500,000 plus Missouri home sellers, they allege that the defendants, which is the National Association of Realtors, and some of your biggest real estate brokerages out there, right? Keller Williams, Remax, Anywhere, and a few others. And they basically allege that the defendants violated antitrust law by conspiring to inflate artificially the commission costs for home sellers, basically requiring home sellers to pay the commission specifically of buyer brokers. And it's through the following and the enforcement of the participation rule, the buyer broker commission rule. That's basically, aligned with the realtor affiliated MLS and has come down from the National Association of Realtors. And those home sellers were victorious in October of 2023 because a verdict was rendered in their favor, basically seeking reimbursement for all of those commission fees paid. So big blow, big surprise. Everyone was following that very closely. And obviously the verdict has sort of ransacked the industry with concerns and other efforts to, okay, what are we going to do now?
Yeah, no, it really has. I know it definitely sent those shockwaves through. It left a lot of people kind of scrambling, even though I think, at least from the messaging that, we've been providing to our realtors is like, hey, this is a very real possibility. Here's how you can, be prepared. Here's what you can do. So when the final verdict came down, while it was still shocking, if you did listen to anything that Ohio Realtors was putting out, it was like, hey, this could happen. Let's be prepared, and here's what you need to know. But I think while we're waiting on the final verdict, because we're still going to be, there's still going to be some time as it works through the court process, and we won't really know what those implications are going to be probably for some time. There is stuff that we can do in the meantime, right? Because I think that's how a lot of people are feeling is like, okay, well, we might not be able to control this or do anything about the verdict or do anything about what's going to happen ultimately. But we as agents can be doing something while we wait for the rest of this to flush out. What can we do while we're still waiting on that final verdict? And as realtors operating in our everyday practices, how can we help combat some of this misinformation that's come out of this verdict?
So, we're talking about a system. I mean, the way commissions are paid, it's been like this for decades, right? I mean, this is what people know. I mean, agents, professionals in the industry, I mean, things have never been different. Sellers have almost been trained this way too. I mean, this is just buyers and trained. This is the way it's been. And I was thinking about this question, and I have brokers and agents, that I'm speaking to daily, Allison, and people are stressed out.
Rightfully so, yeah.
Totally. So I think to myself that even if this verdict were somehow to be overturned or the appeal is successful, I think that, there's already a new mentality going on, and buying agents and brokerages, and all agents for that matter, but they're going to have to look at this a little differently, and specifically for buyer brokers out there. I think there needs to be new discussions between brokers and buyers, new training, new emphasis on using buyer representation agreements. And I'll tell you, here in California, which is where my specialty is and my expertise in real estate, I mean, very rarely have buying agents ever used representation agreements. Now, the forms have existed for years. You could access one, but it was just common practice that it wouldn't be used. And when you think about that, I mean, a listing agent would never enter into a listing with a seller without a listing agent because they're not going to work for free. Well, in some ways, buyer agents have been just taking a gamble, right, for years. So I think one way to look at this is this could be a good thing. Brokers might consider and train their agents on using buyer representation agreements, set out the expectations up front. And I think that this is something that, and I know a lot of big and small brokerages that are doing this right now. They're putting more emphasis on this document to be used, and they're training agents, to discuss commissions with their buyer clients that they've never actually had those conversations before. So I don't think that, no matter what happens with these commission lawsuits, and of course we're reading all about these copycat lawsuits, and there's some in California now. I mean, no matter what happens, I do think the mindset has been changed. I think consumers now have a better understanding of things. So I think no matter what, brokers are going to have to reevaluate, how they address this, the discussion of commission with their clients. And they can do that in a more effective way by using buyer representation agreements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that's something that we have been preaching here too, is using those buyer representation agreements. We're trying to get it, some legislation passed around this. I know that's something we're actively, working on too at the State House, but such a great tool to help combat this. And everyone should be familiarized with themselves with it. Everyone should be using it in their everyday practices and creating, their own. I know here at Ohio Realtors, we have a great template to use, that you can plug and play. Some stuff will help you do that. And yeah, it's really, really just a great option out there. How do you think, and in your experience, in your years in the industry, that we got to this point? And why wasn't this just something that we were doing that was, I mean, what's your perspective on that? Because I'm like, we should be doing this, like you said, for.
I literally have been talking to people about this subject long before the Department of Justice started looking into it. I mean, it just felt, and I will even say at the regulatory level, I just don't know that this area, there's always been a lot of enforcement on the disclosure of commissions by buying agents. So, if you just really break it down really simply, real estate commissions are negotiable. Yes, we know, and they have to be disclosed. So those two aspects, I imagine the laws there in Ohio are probably similar in this regard. In California, you can tell me if they're not. But those are disclosure requirements. Those are discussions that you have to have with your clients. So yes, you're right. How did we get to this point? It's like it just wasn't a standard of practice. And I could point fingers, but I won't. Don't make me. But I think that that's just the way things have always been done. And I actually look at all of this as like a great opportunity. Now buyer agents are going to be able to protect themselves in some ways, right? And they have value to provide. A lot of people are concerned that, buying agents are just going to disappear, right? Buyers are going to work directly with listing agents. And I'll say, the dual agency aspect, there's a lot of, you want to talk about a heated subject, right? don't know that every buyer is going to want the listing agent to represent them and, their needs, right? So I think I'm of the opinion that the buying agent is not a dying breed. And this is an opportunity for them to, provide, their value, state their value, what the value is. I think this is a good thing, really.
This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations.
No, I agree with you. And I think that, you're right. Regardless of whatever comes out of this verdict, I think, the time is now. We should be looking at this now, reviewing it. I think the industry has shifted, regardless of whatever is going to come out of the verdict. And I don't think this is going to change. This isn't going to go away regardless if, something happens in court and all of a sudden it goes away. I think it's here to stay. And I think, that we need to be having that mindset, as you said, and be living and breathing and practicing it, because it's so important. And I agree with you. I don't think that it's going to go away either. And, I think, and I've said this on other podcasts, and we had an economist in, and she said, hey, millennials who are buying homes right now, they are not saying I'm a DIY. I can DIY a lot of stuff, but not when it comes to buying a home. They still want that guidance. They still want that expertise. They're still going to go to somebody and say, help me do this. Maybe, they'll pull up a Zillow listing on their phone and say, this is the house I want, but I don't know how I'm going to get it. And that's where I think we're still going to be valued.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny, you think I would be totally jaded, Allison, because I investigated real estate fraud for years, right? I saw the worst versions of, real estate brokers and agents. And, it's just a teaspoon. There are so many good, hardworking, intelligent, knowledgeable, experienced agents out there. And without them, buyers would never be able to complete a purchase, or sellers would never be able to sell their home. So I'm one of those people who say, yeah, I know, we have access on our phones and there's so much being delivered to us, but there's still a huge gap between just looking for property and then getting knee deep into a transaction.
Yeah, so true. And I don't think that's going to go away. And I don't think that generations who are going to become the next era of home buyers are going to change on that. So I totally agree with you. It's funny that you brought up dual agency, because we get a ton of calls on that. I know our attorneys are always like, they want to talk about dual agency. So it's funny that you brought that up, because that's a hot. It's something that I don't know is that well understood, as you mentioned.
Some states don't allow dual agency. So Ohio is a dual agency state. You allow for that.
Right. So we know that now we need to be doing a better job of explaining it, using those buyer representation agreements. In addition to that, what advice would you give for us to really be explaining how commissions work? Are there certain tools and resources out there that you would recommend? Are there any, certain language that you recommend we should be using? Or how should we best, in addition to those buyer rep agreements, how else can we best explain commission to our clients?
Honestly, and I guess I'm going to defer a little on this question, because I mean, as an agent, in terms of what you're representing to the public on this, there really should be conversations within the brokerage, right? Brokers should be training their agents on how best to explain. And really, there's no need to get fancy here, right? I mean, it's hey, everyone wants to be paid for the work that they do. I think with the buyer representation agreement and some of the narratives that are going to evolve around it is you're going to, for the very first time, for some, you're going to be explaining to buyers, this, I would like to charge this. Of course, there's a negotiation, right? You're going to negotiate a fee for your service. But then there's going to be some explanation. Hey, there is a chance, that the seller may be paying part of my commission. I think it's literally that road of discussion that has not really been traveled before, Allison, where there's actually explanation on how cooperative compensation works. I mean, it's been sort of just absent, right? Sellers have been much more knowledgeable about this than buyers, obviously, and that was the benefit of the listing agreement and explaining how that works with commission. But for buyer agents, this is a whole new ballgame.
Yeah, it is. And I love that you said just keep it simple, set out and explain, just like, you're going to an attorney, you get that listed out and you get that explained to you, hourly rates, and here's what you get for the service. And I love the idea of keeping it simple, just really sitting down, communicating. I think that is number one, just from the step one with your client, step one with anyone you're interacting and hoping to do business with, should be these sort of conversations. And hey, this is how it works. It's just so funny. I just can't get over that this wasn't more of a practice before. And I do agree with your perspective on that. It's probably a positive thing that this is happening because we have a huge opportunity to kind of turn that around and make this more of a focus and really showing off our work. I mean, I don't know if you think so, but I mean, I think that, that realtors can view this as a huge opportunity to show off, why they're so valuable, to show off, their expertise, their skills, their certificate, everything that they have that goes into making them these professionals. This is the time to show it off and let it shine, when maybe it wouldn't have otherwise.
Absolutely. And, admittedly, from a compliance consultant's perspective, I love this, right? Because there's been so many times, like in reviewing transaction files for clients, where I have this like unhealthy, but not unhealthy, not fun conversation with my client about, hey, we're missing a major disclosure here on commissions to your buyer. And there was always this sort of puzzling, look or response like, but the seller's paying my, commission. Why do I have to disclose that? So really, in some ways, no matter what happens, the disclosure of compensation is part of what a licensed real estate professional is supposed to do. So whether you use a buyer representation agreement or not, I mean, I always say it doesn't really matter unless, of course, it's mandated by the law, right? It doesn't really matter what fancy form, and there could be 10 forms, right? It's just about making the material disclosure, getting documents signed, being consistent in what you're communicating to your client in terms of what was on paper and what you're telling them in person. And if you have all of that, you're really mitigating, potential issues in the future, right? I mean, disclosure, material disclosure, it lowers the incidence of misunderstandings and problems. And we all know problems in real estate, people love to litigate. So, you'll get sued even if you did everything right. And, I'm an expert witness in a lot of cases, and I see that a lot. So it's very important to, do the right thing every time.
Yeah, and that's in our code of ethics, right? Is living and upholding by those standards, and that's why those are kind of in place. Is to protect ourselves, and yeah, really, that's all this is. What most of this comes down to is just protecting yourself, making sure you're going to be safe and protected against anything that might come out of this. Is there any other ways that we can be more transparent as realtors and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis? This is one of them, such a huge thing. But how else does transparency play into what we do every day, and are there other opportunities that we can take advantage of this by being more transparent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in California, when I go and speak to groups, I'm always talking about two things. This is how you're going to get in trouble, people. It's the real estate transaction work that you do and your relationships with your clients, and it's your advertising. So and what I would say is this: if you're an agent out there listening to this, I would make sure you know the rules, right? Do you know the rules that you're required to abide by? Do you know if your broker has one, a written policy? Have you read that policy? What is your broker's expectations of you? This is just one area, right? Real estate commissions, getting the right documents signed, having the right conversations and disclosure. But how about everything else? I mean, again, you'll have to forgive me, right? I have a backlog of like a billion cases in my head where people's innocent mistakes have caused serious issues that have cost them, legal fees, civil lawsuits, and even disciplinary action by the California Department of Real Estate. So in terms of the transparency in this commission discussion, you have to maybe reevaluate your whole real estate practice, right? And I always say, if you're an agent, read your broker's policy. Make sure you're in line with your broker's policy, because the broker's policy is usually reflective of the laws and rules that are enforced by the state. So by doing those two things, it's almost like a compliance check, right? Am I doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing across the board and not just in this one area?
Yeah, it's a great time to kind of look, like you said, look at everything, look at all your practices in addition to how you're explaining commissions and why and how you get paid. Take a look at it through all your services, through everything that you're doing, your entire practice. This is a great opportunity that we might not have otherwise to kind of shine a spotlight on some of this stuff. And I think it's really important. And I'm glad, if nothing else has come out of this, it is a positive that we're able to spend the time on this, spend the focused energy on it. Because you're right, it's critical to how we're moving forward. And I know advertising is one of the number one things that we are getting complaints about and ethics violations about. So and we're going to go at a different podcast. I'm going to have some of our professional standards enforcers on to dive into that. But I love that you brought up advertising, because that's the number one violation.
A quick note on advertising, it's not usually the consumers that are telling on you. It's your competitors. So, and guess what? Your competitors know the rules to a T. So they quickly identify how something is lacking. And in California, you can file an online complaint. So, I got brokers coming to me constantly saying, "Hey, I just filed an anonymous complaint on this broker because they were doing that." So there's a lot of advertising complaints and compliance and regulation in California, covering that area.
Yep, same here, same here. I love that you mentioned that's the same in your state too. So very cool. Is there such thing as over communicating? Can we over communicate this? Can we, is that a thing? As we've spent, 25-ish minutes talking about the importance of communicating and how we should be transparent and how we should be explaining things. Is that a thing? Can we be over communicating this, or is just everything we should be explaining everything as much as we can?
I mean, here's the thing. I would prefer someone, a licensed professional, to over communicate versus under communicate. But I don't think it has to be overly complicated. I do think that if agents and brokers stick to sort of a simplified explanation that that they could probably say in their sleep, right? About real estate commissions, the structure, how it works, they're negotiable, and then of course following in the spirit of the buyer representation agreement. I don't think you can go wrong. Now, the only way you could maybe walk down the wrong path is if what you're saying is sort of now maybe disagreeing with what's on paper, or maybe, there's kind of multiple interpretations can come about. And that's why it's just really important to stay simple in these things. And it's not too hard to do.
Keep it simple, because like you said, you don't know what the average consumer or your average client knows about this or understands about it. Keep it and explain it in a way that they can understand. So that giving them an opportunity to ask questions too,
Well, that's another thing. I mean, I think a good exercise, a good training exercise would be, and something that maybe could be implemented by brokerages, would be sort of role play on this, right? Because I do think, aside from providing, sort of, I don't want to say a script, but sure, a script, or just, statements that you're going to make about it, that you're going to get used to making about it. I do think you should anticipate fielding questions on this too. I mean, there's so much, right? And people are hearing different things and people have different concerns. So I think a role play exercise on that would maybe be a valuable exercise for agents, particularly those working with buyers.
I think so too. I think that's a super smart thing to do, a great way to practice it. I mean, even practicing with your family and friends. I mean, I know I've had my family who's come to me and said, "What the heck's going on? And are you guys, reading the news articles and the headlines?"
Yeah, anyone could do this role play. What am I thinking? Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, has our realtor stole money from us? And like all of these questions are coming up that people are seeing, in these headlines. It's a great opportunity to practice with those people, even close in your circle. Say, "Hey, let me break this down to you. Does this make sense to you? Is it going to make sense to my clients and those people that I'm going to work with?" It's a great way to start practicing it. And I mean, I'm not even a realtor, and I've had to explain it to my family. So
Exactly. And I think also, maybe even the role play on, stating your value proposition, right? What do you bring to the table? What is your expertise? What are your successes? What are your approaches? What are you going to do for me? I think those are selling points that need to be offered up as part of this process.
Yes, all of that, the value proposition, what makes you special? Why should someone hire you? Why should someone not walk into the largest purchase of their life alone? I mean, that's a pretty simple question to me when you break it down like that. But I mean, not everybody thinks like that in this world of DIY, in this world of the internet, in this world of I can Google whatever and figure out how to get into contracts. I mean, spend some time thinking about your services and what you bring and really be prepared to explain that to people. And honestly, there's so much out there that our realtors do. I know NAR has put together a ton of resources that has all this information on there. It's not going to take very long to compile, I don't think, at least from our members. And I know how wonderful and fabulous they are and what they bring to the table. So really great ideas. I mean, it's so important, more so now than ever. And like you mentioned, Summer, like this isn't going to go away. So if you're waiting on the lawsuits to just disappear or that to just be over, this is going to stick around.
Don't wait. You don't want to be left behind on this. You want to be a leader, right? So you figure it out now. You have time, but figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to wait until this moment's passed and you're forced to do it. Do it now, while you can and get ahead of it as much as you can.
You're doing your client a service. I mean, you're a licensed real estate agent or broker for a reason. It's all part of, really it's part of your fiduciary duty to your client to be disclosing these things. So think of it that way.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Summer, this was so great. We could keep going and keep talking and keep giving more advice. But in the essence of time, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing your expertise and your perspectives on this topic. And thanks for everything you do for our industry and helping us stay compliant.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
And to all of our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.